All right, everyone, well, welcome back. And this morning we have a very special guest, definitely a mainstay in the commentating scene in MMA. So, Jon Anik, thank you very much for joining us today, man. Really appreciate it. So, look, I want to get straight into it. So, the news obviously breaking overnight here in Australia that Conor McGregor and Michael Chandler is now official for The Ultimate Fighter. And, you know, whilst the rumors were definitely hinting that this was the direction the UFC was going to go, having it confirmed, it definitely adds some of that extra excitement to the fight game, knowing that, you know, we have a Conor McGregor fight on the horizon this year. So I just sort of wanted to get your early thoughts on the fight, as, you know, I think we could be looking at one of the most explosive first rounds in MMA this year.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, and it's great to be with you, fellas, obviously, especially given the timing in advance of another big UFC pay-per-view and obviously the timing of this Conor McGregor-Michael Chandler news. Do we have a weight class for the fight? Do we know if it's going to be at welterweight or lightweight?
I'm hearing 170.
Yeah, so that'll be interesting to see Chandler there. I think, obviously, there are some variables with Conor McGregor, given the layoff, given the injury, but for Michael Chandler, I think there's a big variable there competing at 170 pounds. But I think the fight makes a lot of sense. And, you know, I do think it stands to reason that either guy could be on a championship trajectory at lightweight, even if this fight is being contested at welterweight. You know, I wish it was happening sooner, but obviously we'll have the build up of The Ultimate Fighter and the two of them verbally going back and forth at each other. I think it'll give Chandler an opportunity to shine. At least as far as some of his naysayers are concerned. They feel like he's a little bit vanilla. They feel like sometimes he is trite, and I think this will give an opportunity for people to see what he's really made of. Nobody verbally can compete with Conor McGregor in terms of just natural orating skills. I can't certainly compete with that guy, but I do think that it gives Chandler an opportunity to shine and a big platform on which to do so. But yeah, it's a good fight, and I think big picture, most exciting thing is that Conor McGregor's back in a competitive setting, and at least we're getting him once in 2023.
100%. Look, John, first thing I've got to acknowledge is a little shout out to your brother Jason. Obviously, he's your twin brother and somewhat a friend of ours. And look, man, as much as we are MMA bound and in this conversation, I know you guys have the Anik Square podcast, and you know, when we had Jason on, I spoke with him about it preseason and what his thoughts were for the Super Bowl. As an Australian NFL fan myself. So as we are, you know, a little over a week away from Super Bowl 57, obviously the Chiefs and the Eagles, as an Aussie NFL fan, I want to get your prediction on the Super Bowl, as my beloved Green Bay Packers are nowhere to be found.
Yeah, well, I do think the future's bright. I do like your head coach, Matt LaFleur, but obviously Packers are done for this year. So I will be in Sydney watching the first half of the game. I'll leave Perth. I'll watch the first half in Sydney, and then I'll be on an airplane for the second half of the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. You know, I haven't bet the game yet, and it sounds like a little bit of a cop-out to suggest to people that you're just going to wait and bet the game live, but I can kind of see value on both sides. I think Philadelphia has been the best team all season long, and I think active roster 1 through 45 on game day, Philly's probably the best team, but I'm just not in any great rush to bet against that Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce combination. Obviously, I love Andy Reid. And oftentimes for me, and I've said this before when I'm handicapping, sometimes I go, you know, head coach, quarterback, kicker. And I think Harrison Butker could absolutely be heard from in the Super Bowl. So I guess right now, forced to choose, I probably go Kansas City. But I'm going to wait and reserve the right to change my mind as we get closer to kickoff.
Like that.
Definitely. So, John, look, I wanted to get your opinion on, you know, the Powerslap League, as it's obviously something that's quite controversial, you know, at the moment in the world of MMA. And, you know, while it is not MMA in and of itself, it is inextricably linked and tied to the UFC. So I just wanted to get sort of your thoughts on the Powerslap League. And, you know, do you think that this sort of early controversy that it's facing is something that it can overcome?
You know, I think it can overcome the controversy, if for no other reason than Dana White is so bullish, and I think the people who are behind it are so bullish about seeing it through and getting it done. And candidly, for me, I feel a little bit torn because I have a lot of friends who are working on the show. Yeah. But as somebody who is largely anti-concussion and as somebody who covered a boxing death back in 2005, I'll admit to it being a little bit off-putting. You know, at first I was very excited about it. I thought the highlights were pretty cool and I was all about it. But I think as I've ingested more of it, you know, I just see the potential for just brain trauma, guys. You know, I mean, I don't really know that there's much else to it. I mean, I don't see it as martial arts, far be it from me to, you know, get in the way of those individuals making a living. But I have always put MMA on a pedestal against sports like boxing and even football, right? Because in boxing, you can get a concussion and then they give you 8 to 10 seconds to stand back up and come get another concussion. Usually in mixed martial arts, you only get one concussion per fight. Now, you can get a million concussions in training camp if you're not doing it the right way. But I don't know. For someone like me who's been hospitalized with 2 concussions, this is scary for me. It gets scarier with every passing highlight, and I'm sure Dana and everybody else is doing their homework, but I can't say they have a full-fledged supporter in me.
100%. That's fair enough. And look, John, something I want to sort of touch base on quickly is, I think everyone in the MMA community was ecstatic to learn of the return of one Jon Jones at UFC 285 March 4th, a little over a month away. And this is one of those fights that going into it has a lot of questions, which are generally my personal favorites, those fights that before you go into it have a lot of questions, the ones that aren't answered yet. What's Jon going to look like after the layoff? Can Cyril manage Jones's wrestling? What's Jones going to look like at heavyweight? So many questions that need to be, answered. What, in your opinion, makes this fight so exciting for you as a commentator and also a fan of the sport?
Well, I think you can argue that this is a more dangerous fight for Jon Jones than Francis Ngannou or Stipe Miocic would have been. Now, I can argue on all 3 sides of that fence, but it stands to reason that Cyril Gane, given the footwork, given just his combination of size and speed and mental agility and fight IQ, that he presents a real difficult challenge for Jon Jones. But Johnny Bones is the greatest of all time, and I think he relishes that challenge. And I do think when Jon Jones comes back, even though Francis and Stipe were the names on the tip of his tongue and the fights he was hoping would materialize, he knew that there was this Cyril Gane problem, and he was probably expected that he was going to have to face him at some point in time. It's a fascinating fight. I'm hopeful I'm going to get the chance to actually fly out and spend some time with Jon before the fight to see him in person. But I just have to tell you guys, and as Jose Aldo goes into the Hall of Fame, I talk about being starstruck in front of a few of these athletes. The fighters that I'm in the same room with, even though I've been doing this for 15, 20 years, but you share breathing room with Jose Aldo and Robert Whittaker. Some of these guys, it just hits you in a different way. And I'm sure you guys, to whatever degree, can speak to that. Yeah. It's the same way with Jon Jones, man. Brothers have Super Bowl rings at home, and there's just something about walking into a room in which Jon Jones or Anderson Silva or George St. Pierre is sitting in. There's something indescribably special about this guy. He's the best mixed martial arts athlete that I've ever seen. And, when he says I have at least 2 more fights for the fans, right? It's like, gosh, I hope we get at least 2 more out of you and at least 3 more out of Conor, right? Because Jon really is special. And I do feel like because of some circumstances that he has brought upon himself and otherwise, we have been sort of, robbed of big chunks of his fighting prime. And that's unfortunate.
Yep.
Definitely. So, John, look, I'm sure you've been asked at this point ad nauseum on your infamous line just prior to one of the biggest KOs in UFC history by Leon Edwards. And I'm, of course, speaking to the line, but that is not the cloth from which he is cut right before he landed the head kick. Does that specific moment stand out for you in your career alongside some of your highlights, such as being able to commentate your friend and broadcast partner, DC, winning the heavyweight belt?
Yeah, sometimes there's a recency bias involved when you get asked about certain calls, especially when, more often than not, I feel like I'm the oldest guy in the room these days. But yeah, the Leon Edwards call was really special, in part because I always say the most special part of my job is seeing a man or woman break through and become a UFC champion for the first time. So for him to do it with all of those circumstances, from that perfection and that immortality and the Anderson Silva record and everything else. I always say MMA is just the craziest, unpredictable theater in live sports, and I'm not sure there's any greater example of that than the Leon Edwards head kick knockout. Now, as far as my place in it, humble as I do think my timing was really better than lucky than good. If that fight ends, nobody's ever thinking about, if that fight goes to the cards, nobody's ever looking at that. But I will tell you guys, and I've said this before, in the moment when I heard sort of the moral victory stuff again at that point in the fight, I couldn't deal with it again at that point in my head. As a fan or a commentator, it was like, but this guy, man, he ain't chasing no goddamn moral victory, and then fucking boom. So it's pretty crazy. And now at least I have an easy answer when people ask me about my most memorable calls. But I'm glad you mentioned the DC one because honestly, so many things happen, right? And even right now, as we get ready for Makhachev and Volkanovski, people are bemoaning the fact that they're not getting the promotional rub that they deserve. Part of that's just the fact that we got 41 shows a year. You're mentioning, calling the DC Stipe rarefied air. Like, dude, I feel like that was a lifetime ago. Yeah. So I appreciate you acknowledging that. But yeah, the Leon Edwards one for me will probably be the call, no matter how long I do this, that really withstands the test of time.
John, I imagine sometime in the next week, like you said, you'll be getting on that plane and preparing for the long haul over to us here down under. And I know you've been to Australia more than once now, and I tend to be a little bit biased. And I truly believe between us and, say, the English, I think we have some of the best fans in the sport. What is your favourite aspect? One of your favourite aspects of Australia, and what are some of your favourite memories from previous trips down under?
So if it was closer, and you guys have heard this before, we and our families would be there all the time. It would be our top vacation destination. Certainly Mark Hunt and Bigfoot Silva in Brisbane. I remember doing a Mark Hunt show. Mark Hunt will always have a special place in my heart, the lead fucking horse, so doing a show that he headlined in Adelaide will always be special for me. But it really is the people and the relationship between mixed martial arts, the UFC, and the average Aussie, right? It's like the NFL here in the United States of America. I feel that love when I walk down the street in Australia. I don't necessarily feel that love in America. People in Australia are coming up to me at the airport asking if I've seen the post-fight press conference for the paper that I just called. With respect, I haven't seen it yet. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I will have an appearance in Australia like after the ceremonial weigh-in, and that's because I care so much about this fan base. It's so rare that we get to go over there nowadays. Certainly a global pandemic sort of reared its head into all of that, but normally if you guys follow me at all, you know that right after the ceremonial weigh-in, I hunker down and I'm working the rest of the night. But I feel an obligation to these fans to make the trip to Perth, right? Even if that middle leg is 17 hours and 45 minutes, the flight on either end of that, and it's 37 hours door to door, I feel an obligation. There's just something undeniably special about where you guys are from and the relationship that you guys have with the UFC. And I'm not saying it because I'm in the room with you guys today. You guys are rabid, just like Canada, Brazil, and England, but I really do think Australia has set itself apart just in terms of the sophistication of the average Aussie UFC fan, just in terms of the knowledge. And, believe you me, I'm excited to get over there. To quote the great Michael Bisping, believe you me, I can't wait to
Awesome.
Definitely. So, look, John, a point that, we have somewhat belabored on our show here is what we like to call the forgetfulness of fighting, in the sense that, once a fighter, a commentator, or an important figure in the sport is no longer in the direct spotlight, the sport just so quickly forgets about their contributions to the sport. Is there someone particular in the UFC family that you feel has been instrumental in the development of the sport that you feel is somewhat overlooked or forgotten about?
It's a great question, and the fan base tends to turn over pretty quickly, even though we can all sit here and argue that the UFC has never been stronger. Yep. There's a lot of power slap content out there right now, and so sometimes maybe there can be some brand confusion. I think part of the reason why I'm not a part of that is because you wouldn't necessarily want to be confusing wholesale all of our announcers with that power slap brand. Obviously the way the UFC Hall of Fame is set up, I like it largely because it allows us to honor the pioneers and honor specific fights while also acknowledging the modern era, right? But sometimes it is problematic because you have a guy like Diego Sanchez, right? However crazy at this stage of his life, and I love you, Diego, right? But Diego Sanchez gets into the Hall of Fame for his fight with Clay Guida, right? So yes, Diego Sanchez is technically a Hall of Famer, but if you separate him from that fight, just based upon Diego Sanchez's body of work, the original Ultimate Fighter with respect to Forrest Griffin, he's right there with you, Forrest, just an absolute warrior who was 19-1 in his own right, who did fight BJ Penn for the title. I just felt like Diego Sanchez, in terms of the individual body of work, deserved to go out the way someone like Donald Cerrone maybe will go out and be remembered. So Diego's the first name that comes to mind. I think history doesn't necessarily give Jens Pulver the respect that he deserves, but I just hope that even though Diego Sanchez is doing the bare knuckle thing and his life is where it's at right now, I just hope people don't forget how good he was in his prime, because he got in for a fight, but he could easily be a modern era UFC Hall of Fame.
100%. Look, John, this is the last question from us, man. We don't want to take too much of your time, and we know it's late, getting late. So, last one from us, which is, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this one. We are now exactly 7 days away from, in my mind, the most anticipated title fight in recent memory. And like the Jones and Cyril Gane fight, this fight has a plethora of questions heading into it. And the main one, I think, by the media and everyone else, is how will Volk negate Islam's wrestling? And your essay piece on Volk that you posted last week actually gave me goosebumps. That's how good it was, because he is just that guy who wasn't on anyone's radar. He wasn't the blue chip prospect, but he is, however, the definition in my mind of what hard work can accomplish. What for you makes this fight so exciting, and what are your thoughts on the fight itself?
Gosh, man, I mean, you set it up beautifully. You're giving me chills. Where do I even begin? Like, how much time do we have left, right? As far as Islam Makhachev is concerned, I'm not sure, and I've said this before, that any fighter has had as much expectation or pressure to become a UFC champion as he has had. Yep. You know, even before Khabib Nurmagomedov was the man, you heard Abdulmanap and people at American Kickboxing Academy say, you know, when Khabib's done, it's going to be Islam's turn. So the fact that he was able to respond to that pressure and win 10 consecutive fights and ultimately submit Charles Oliveira and win the title doesn't get celebrated enough, right? But it does fly in the face of a lot of Alexander Volkanovski and the way he came in, because even though he was heralded because of the winning streak, and as we were putting that essay together, at times I was thinking maybe this doesn't quite give him the credit, right? Because even though he wasn't the blue chip prospect, you could be sure we knew acutely who Alexander Volkanovski was when he made his UFC debut. But the forecast wasn't necessarily championship. You know, people think that he was this 5-star, 5-tool, true plus athlete that we know him to be right now. And it's exciting for me that he's getting this opportunity, and he made sure that he was the guy, right? Put himself in the position for promotion more than once as a backup, right? To try to chase this dream. And I think it's happening at a much better time for him than Izzy. You know, Izzy kind of seemed like there was some reluctance when he was fighting Jan Blachowicz, almost as if it was, you know, Eugene Behrman's idea more than it was his. I think it's happening on the perfect timeline for Alexander Volkanovski. And what's most amazing to me about Volkanovski's legacy is that we talk so much about the greatest of all time. And we touch on this in the essay too, right? But I'm not sure the GOAT conversation within a division has been more competitive than it is at featherweight, where it has always been this three-headed race, or at least recently with Jose Aldo, Max Holloway, and Alexander Volkanovski. And the fact that Volkanovski has essentially closed up that conversation for most of us is insane. Like, if you would have told me after I was walking out of Max Holloway, Calvin Kattar, you know, a couple of years ago, right? Yeah. Alexander Volkanovski a couple of years later would have closed the book on greatest featherweight of all time before Jose Aldo can even get his fucking Hall of Fame jacket. It's absolutely amazing. So when people like Daniel Cormier suggest that this would be the biggest upset in UFC history, now I understand Makhachev's greatness, right? But this wouldn't even be close to that. This wouldn't be a top 50 or top 100 UFC upset of all time. You're talking about one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. How does he hold up to the strength and physicality, guys? I really don't know. But I think Chael Sonnen put it best, and we reiterated this on our podcast. You know, if Islam Makhachev goes in there and outstrikes Volkanovski for a considerable duration, or out-grapples or out-wrestles him, this will really be the first time that we see somebody go in there and dominate Alexander Volkanovski in any realm of mixed martial arts. So, you know, I'm glad I have a front row seat for it. We'll see what happens here in a week's time.
100%. John, you're a consummate professional, and it's been a true privilege and an honor for us to get the chance to talk to you today, man. We hope you have the safest of flights down here and enjoy your time. It's beautiful weather at the moment. It's good hot sunny weather, so enjoy your time here, man. I hope you get a bit of holiday time, and we would absolutely love to talk to you again in the future, man.
Anytime. You guys sound great. Are you guys in Perth? Is that where you guys are?
We're in Brisbane.
Brisbane.
Okay, so you're going to make the trip over or no? Yeah,
we were potentially going to make the trip over, but tickets sold out really fast. It was.
Oh, I know. I feel awful. You know, and that's another thing, right? That sort of pulls at our heartstrings too, right? Because we just went to Rio de Janeiro for the first time in 4 years, and for whatever reason, we weren't sold out, you know, and Perth has obviously been the hottest ticket in town. But as media or fans, I hope to see you guys at some point in the future. But thank you guys for having me.
Thank you very much, John.
Thank you very much, John.
Thanks, boys. Have a good day.